Good morning. My name is Margaret Robertson. I think I know most people, but if you don't know me, I, along with Jill McPherson, sitting here on my right, we're getting a bit of an echo, are your host today for the Friends of the QV Mag Morning Coffee series on our people and their stories, the monthly series. We have a really exciting morning ahead with several speakers representing a diverse cross-section of our wonderful community here in Launceston and northern Tasmania. To begin then, we the Friends of the QV Mag acknowledge the first inhabitants of the nation and the traditional custodians of the lands and waters where we live, learn and work. The Leta Rama Runa people, the Paninha people and the Cheranotipana people. We honour their enduring culture and knowledges. It's a fairly special morning. We're continuing today to focus on a sense of community and connectedness, a pretty special dimension of life at the moment in the strange times in which we live. And so we're going to put the focus today on these things here. And before we launch into a discussion of how we use these things, it's quite interesting to reflect on the history of books. Interestingly enough, the history of books has become quite a scholarly study. It's one which academics have been pursuing, particularly since the late 19th century. So if you're interested in the history of books, there's a dimension there that might grab your attention rather than what's in the inside. And just for a moment, by way of background, I thought it was worth reflecting on where we get to this stage. We know we had oral cultures, and once oral cultures developed language, then language became a dimension to record the views of other and as a means of communication. And we know that those records go back to the 4th millennium BC. So it's a long history. It's nothing new. In the early days, of course, it might have been on stone and tablet. And I'm fascinated to read that perhaps the first signs of paper came in China. And among other things, the Chinese used the bark from the mulberry. Isn't that interesting? To create paper. So that goes back to about the 1st century BC. Now, of course, you know that in those early times, all of the recording was done by hand. There was no printing system. And so it was a scholarly process. It meant that these things were really not available to ordinary people, even if they had the skills to be able to read. It wasn't really until much, much later that the Japanese developed a system through wood printing of being able to mass produce or copy meticulously and through a very slow process the words into multiple versions. And of course, since then, that's opened up into a whole new ballgame. Once you start to copy the manuscripts of the scholars into a form that's available to all of the folk who can read, then you've got another dimension to contend with. Because before that, probably books were really left in the closets and they were hidden, if you like. They were scholarly manuscripts. Once they were mass-produced, you've got ordinary people having access to the written word. So it meant then that the content of these things became important because you had to then connect with your audience. And so you can trace the evolution, if you like, of fiction through the origins and development of the print mechanisms and the mass production of the books. Hard copies, of course, were the only acceptable form in the early days and probably through much of the 19th century. It was this lot, really, who started to bring the mass production into the general audience. And you know that little symbol there, the penguin, is famous for having achieved those wider audiences. And of course, if we segue on from there, into the social media and the mass production through the internet and the e-books, then all of this is a bygone story. So the history of books in itself, let alone the content of the books, is in fact a fascinating story. We love our books. We wouldn't be here if we didn't love our books. And probably for as long as books have been around, there have been communities gathering to talk about the content of those books. There are many of them here locally in Launceston, and I know as a fledgling member of one of the groups, this has been a very warm and wonderful experience for me to have in my post-academic life. It's been a way of connecting with ideas and wonderful people and friends. And I'd like to introduce then our session this morning by introducing first of all our speakers. And sadly, Helen is not with us today. She's sending us all her wonderful best wishes. So I'll speak a little bit for Helen in a moment. But Di Atkins and other members of that group are sitting here. Could you raise your hands, please? Jenny Barker and two Jennys here. Yes. Oh, and Jill and Susie. Jill has come up from Hobart and Susie Warner. So all members of the same group. Then we have segueing into Jill McPherson. Jill and her group members are here, I believe. Put your hands up. Shout there. And then from Jill to Helen French, and then finally Leslie. Now Leslie's going to give us a kind of, yes, okay, great. Leslie's going to give us a bit of a kaleidoscope of many book clubs she's experienced. You might think there's a little bit of gender bias here. It's not meant to be that way. We've tried desperately to encourage the male book club people to be here today. They seem to be fairly small in numbers in this part of the world. However, of course, we do know that book clubs of all genders are very much the life of communities around the country and as they are internationally. So let me then just start by giving you a little bit of an overview, in lieu of Helen not being able to be here, of a very special book club. This is a book club that started in 1966. So if I... And this is a photograph of, an early photograph of many of the members. I thought it was quite interesting to read out the list of the original members. These are mostly, well, I think Jenny, Susie and Jill, you can comment here, but women who were probably mostly in the country, at home, needing some outlet to give them a source of interest and connection with other women, and to share their experiences and use books as that vehicle to do so, and to get together over lovely, friendly lunches. And if Helen were here, she would say very strongly that my book club is a group of my friends who are very important to me. We meet monthly, we have a nice lunch, and we talk about books. The original group, and I'll just read it out because there may be some of the members here or community here who would be familiar with some very significant names in our northern community. So Helen Gibson is Helen Scott Young, Janet Roberts, Liz Florence, Pat Cameron, Patience Cameron, Fifi McKinnon, Bertie von Vibber, Veronica Keach, Hazel Granger, thank you, Edmay Cameron and Laird Taylor. That was in 1966. That group is still going, and we still have Helen as an original member, who is still our secretary, if you like, and looks after the books and cares for all of our needs in that dimension. We miss her today very strongly. So from there, mindful of time and for everyone to have a chance to speak, I'd like to go on in time a little bit, and we get up to 1992. And I have a record here of the monthly meetings, because not only does Helen keep the secretarial side of the book club going, she has also a series of notebooks with the members who attended each of the monthly meetings throughout that long time, plus the book that they actually read at that time. So it's a really rich archive of community and ideas and discussions. So it's important. So we go from 1966, we come through to 1992, and here I see on the list is Di Atkins. Now, Di has been a member of this group, but Di has also been a member of other groups. And I'm going to hand over to Di now to share with you her experiences of her groups. No, you come forward. You come. Oh, you're right. Okay, there you go.
Thank you, Margaret. I currently belong to this group, but many years ago, when I lived at Dilston with my husband and my young family, Adult Education had the idea of supplying a speaker to small local neighbourhoods to lead just discussion groups on subjects of the leader's expertise. And it was very interesting, very community-minded, and we all enjoyed it. Thank you. It appeared to lead to the invention of book discussion groups. My friend Pat Cleveland and I heard about this, and we decided to follow it up and form a group. We're mostly young marrieds who craved intellectual stimulation outside the subject of babies, nappies and washing machines. But we also included a couple of teachers from the Launceston Teachers College. And we had a midwife, and we had a couple of older women. So it was a pleasant and sort of promising diversity of people. Our meetings were at night. No babies, no food, perhaps a little alcohol. In the early 60s, it was still expected that young married women gave up their jobs in favour of looking after the hearth and the husband and having children and taking care of them. The creche was the only public form of childcare locally until the child grew to be 4 or 5 years old and was old enough to go to preschool. Some advanced husbands may have tolerated their wives working, but pregnancy certainly precluded the career of women by both their husbands and employers, and in those days would-be grandmothers. Our young mothers were mostly from interstate or overseas, so they didn't have local family to care for their children. And of course, our career membership was busy during the day, so evenings it was. While our supportive mates took care of our children, if they were willing, my memory is that we conscientiously and vicariously, or even gratefully, read every word of the books that transported us outside our small circles. And the discussions and arguments that ensued were lively and humorous. But it did vary. One member was an artistic and intellectual girl, and she wasn't very good at allotting her time, I think, and she hardly ever read the book. But her husband always did. And they obviously found time to discuss the book between the two of them. He'd tell her about it, and she'd come along and say, "Well, Tom said." So with all these now pretty well historic attitudes toward prehistoric attitudes to wives working and so forth, it wasn't long before we read Betty Friedan's The Feminine Mystique. We found it provoking and probably moved us to rethink our relative positions. It was soon followed by Germaine Greer and The Female Eunuch, and that was even more naughty and provoking, of course. Maybe it wasn't a direct result, but it might just have happened anyway. But soon, in the 70s, members started furthering their earlier careers or embarked on entirely new studies, and we were financially encouraged by Gough Whitlam, of course. One close friend, whose husband was at sea, took care not to emulate a friend of hers who was in a similar position, and the friend studied horticulture and became more involved with geraniums than with her seagoing husband. But our member did eventually graduate and became a teacher. Another member was Vivian Ellis, who went on to write books herself, mostly on Tasmanian history. Most of us here would have read her Louisa Meredith book and her Trugadini, and I think Augustus Robinson, or at least everyone would be aware of them. And of course, Pat Cleveland created her own art gallery and shop, Handmark, with great success. At the club's inception, adult education regularly supplied us with a leader, usually an erudite person, sometimes even the author of the book. This was followed up by extensive notes of theirs, well written by well-qualified reviewers. Today, we mostly fly alone. At one juncture, we became bored with the books supplied. There were too many light Australian biographies. So for a year, we bought our own choices. Adult Ed subsequently, very graciously, let us back into the fold, and they were able to buy some more deep and meaningful titles. But a huge debt of gratitude was owed to Adult Ed for providing 12 books to 12 members every month. Apart from not losing the books, there was no hard rules to follow, and we didn't need any to invent any amongst ourselves. There was no bitching in the group. In fact, I think a lot of us made some close friends, and we really enjoyed the opinions and the diverse backgrounds and the experiences of all our members. 3 of our members each had a seriously incapacitated child, and so we helped and shared in these difficulties. I remember one of the members, her younger brother was 18, and his number came up to be sent to Vietnam and that kind of thing. You know, we had those sorts of things to sympathise with, I guess. So over the 60 years, we've followed each other's fortunes to a certain degree. Some have moved overseas, some interstate, and some have died. But a few are still around. The group itself came to an end about 10 years ago, when membership declined to about 5 and they wouldn't supply books anymore to them, which was a bit cruel. I left the group in the early 80s when we moved to Beauty Point, and I found the winter nights too dark and foggy on the river to encourage driving. But I was lucky enough to be invited to join the group that Margaret was speaking about, and I've happily belonged to it to this day. The author, American author, Stephen King, has recently described the book as portable magic. Very imaginative and rather a thrilling definition, I think. And it's apt. It's perhaps the reason the book has lasted through centuries and survived the electronic onslaught. It's particularly apt when you're handed a book, not necessarily of your own choice, provided by some anonymous library option, and in its pages, you, the reader, discover a story, some excitement, some brilliant literary prose, something that may have lain in wait for you from the time of Dickens, or something that's only recently been published. I think we all agree that a book can provide magic in our lives.
Guy's been talking about a time when women were forced to leave work if they were employed. So it's interesting to reflect historically, isn't it, on context of time and place. And the magic, I think, that Di has discussed there shows just the power of the book for bringing a very rich dimension to life. Now, let's move on to another time, to Jill. Jill, who's going to talk about a time and a context very different.
Margaret said to me, just press the button, you'll be right, but I knew I'd blow it up, so she had to press it for me. I've got my little bag because I've got a couple of artefacts, but anyway, not being technology-minded. Well, it's a truth universally acknowledged that readers deprived of literary discussion must be in want of a book group. Well, this is the story of my book group. Now, I wondered, what narrative voice should I assume? Third person omniscient? First person? And what type of voice? Ironic? Detached? Intimate? Comedic? And form? Flashback? Or straightforward? Epistolary? Present tense? Past tense? Should the language be spare? Richly descriptive? Oxymoronic? Well, I've been with the same group for over 30 years and there are just so many ways to tell a story. However, relax. I'm opting for a straightforward narrative in unadorned prose that has a beginning, a middle, but no end as yet. Chapter 1, Origin. We formed, we think, in the 1990s. The actual year is shrouded in the mists of time. Record keeping was not a strong point. A group of semi-strangers were brought together by 2 or 3 initiators who'd had the experience of belonging to book groups before. So about 12 individuals turned up to a Launceston residence where we sat around a very large table that wouldn't have been out of place in Pemberley, plied with wine and savouries, and discussion began. Now, most were very tentative. I doubt if anyone knew everyone, but everyone knew someone. All women of a similar age, teachers, librarians, health professionals, and welfare, caring professions, I would say. All were very busy, mid-career, parents of children living at home, and probably time poor, but we never talked about that. So why did we commit? Simply for the love of reading and talking about reading. People have come and gone from that book, but really very, very few personnel changes over those years until COVID struck. But more of that a bit later. Lots of other changes though, lots of other changes as time marched on, and reflecting on this, we've been through a lot together. These are life changes you would expect over 30 plus years. Yet despite the upheavals, individuals rarely missed a session except when travelling. We joined the state library system that we've just heard about, and so we needed a name. As we first met in East Launceston, we adopted this as our name, the East Launceston Book Group. creativity somewhat lacking, but we are readers, not writers. A secretary was appointed to manage admin, i.e. nag people to pay their dues. In those days, it wasn't a free service. The secretary had to pick up and return books, again, nag those who didn't return them. And as would be expected, the inaugural secretary was a librarian. Great managers, and it is a personal affront for a librarian to lose a book. The secretary was a role for life, or at least until many years had passed and pleas for release were eventually listened to, and the next victim picked up the load for the next few years. Chapter 2, Procedures. We selected books from the library's quite extensive list, and I have here the little support material that came with those books. This is The Age of Innocence, and it's written by Mimi Roynfeldt, whoever she was, but this was one the secretary didn't get. Anyway, we decided early on that our list would contain mainly fiction, but include a classic, always a classic, every year, and at least one expository work, you know, whether it's history, biography, so on. In the selection, the library didn't always give us what we wanted, and we were pretty strict about our list. We didn't put in extra ones because we didn't want them to give us other ones, but of course they did. And occasionally that would work for us because you'd discover a new writer, but after about 20 years we found it a bit restrictive. So we now buy our own books. Kindle is cheaper, but it's hard to put sticky notes on a Kindle, and also we like to have sticky notes and dog ear, so mostly we buy them. I thought I could do this talk today by pretending to be a bit academic and have some statistics, do some research, you know, ask or answer the question, are book groups still popular? How many are in Tasmania, for example? Any men's groups? Any men part of any groups? However, I hit the library's privacy policy. They wouldn't reveal anything, except that book groups are still popular. There is no cost now, and they don't keep details on individuals. We used to be, you know, have our names listed, and that way they, even if they could, they wouldn't tell me how many men there were. Anyway, I did find out by accident that there are men's groups, and this is quite wonderful. It just happened incidentally the day before yesterday when I had to ring back a man who'd made an inquiry at the desk here. Was he talking this Wednesday at the book group session? Anyway, he wasn't, but we had the most fascinating conversation, and someone had told him he was, some book council person, so it was a bit confusing for him, but he was very relieved not to be speaking. But he is part of the Tough Guy Book Club, and you can Google them, and it's a national group. There are 70 groups across the country, 4 in Tasmania. They have up to 14 in a group, and no more because not everyone can contribute then. They are not allowed to read things like aeroplanes of World War II or the new submarine design, or, you know. And they all meet in a pub on the first Wednesday of every month at 7:30 to 10:30. What a wonderful idea. And they have to talk about novels, so they have to talk about feelings, etc. Back to my story, the leader. The leader takes responsibility for guiding the discussion, and in reality is very, very well prepared, so the discussion never flags. Not that this really is an issue. This role was quite daunting at first, and I'm sure I prepared more diligently than for any university tutorial at first. However, we're now more relaxed. Chapter 4, the host. This person provides the venue and the hospitality. However, they must not go to any trouble. Cooking is absolutely forbidden, and no coffee or tea at the end of the evening. This is to keep the host engaged in the discussion. However, there's no shortage of liquid refreshments or tasty offerings, and in fact we graze through the night. We go to sometime after 9:30. Partners, children and animals are spirited away for the occasion, never to be seen. The meeting schedule, we meet every month, the fourth Wednesday. Tuesday. That's right. That's why I'm tired. December and January accepted. Now this date is set in stone. We tried to change it once, so we'll never do that again. January is a holiday, and the December date has to be negotiated around people's social engagements. So that's quite a challenge. The very first time we had a celebration, and you can see some there, talk about that in a little minute, we went to a restaurant. The leader had prepared assiduously for the discussion. Nobody was in the mood for discussion, and cerebral activities were definitely not on show that night. We were also too loud. So ever since, our celebrations are in the privacy of a home where the no cooking rule prevails. We have it catered. However, the no effort rule goes out the window as our hostesses, different ones each year, although I must say it tended to fall upon the same people, they went to enormous lengths to create a wonderful setting, and the table settings and so on, as you can see, are quite stunning. We would get dressed up sometimes and have a theme. The one you can see there, where one of our members has pants with writing on, was text as fashion. And I have an artefact. I must say the Shakespearean derriere hasn't really taken off. And we don't have a December book. How am I going for time? There have been a few variations to our reading discussions. For example, we've occasionally watched a film. The English Patient, I remember, as one great one. Very recently, we've watched television specials. Richard E. Grant, who I'm sure you know is wonderful, has a series on one of the streaming platforms where he takes you on a literary tour of Spain, France, Italy, and we loved those. And that led us to reading Christ Adopted Eberly by Carlo Levi, and a couple of wonderful weekend retreats we had, I remember, and also theatre excursions. But mostly it's just that one monthly meeting. Now, COVID brought challenges. For a while we stopped meeting, then we Zoomed, and then tentatively resumed meetings. But it was at this stage that some members of the group decided to leave. Their priorities had shifted, and it seemed a good time. So they know they're welcome to return whenever, but we're now just 6. Fortunately, we had a new member join us a few years ago. It takes a while to be an old member. And we're not recruiting, as we're finding the smaller group really flexible. We don't have a program or worked out in advance anymore. We go from month to month. For example, we enjoyed Andrew Hagen's memoir, memoir Mayfly so much that the next month we followed up with his novel, Our Fathers. This year in May we discussed Ruth Wilson's wonderful The Jane Austen Remedy, and last night, in fact, we read and discussed, no, we didn't read the whole thing last night, we discussed Northanger Abbey. We no longer have paid employment, so there's even more time to read. And at the end of every meeting, we share suggestions for books, streaming programs, films, etc. Discussing travel experiences has always been part of our group. But it's time you heard another voice. Not a physical one, unfortunately for you, it's still me, but a narrative one. That recently joined member I referred to, one who joined several years ago, is doing the last part of this talk, which is to outline the benefits of being in a group. So Chapter 6, Conclusion, the benefits from the perspective of a new member who shall remain nameless. I was a very new resident of Launceston when I was invited to join this book group. In my mind, literature has always done an extraordinary job of providing community and provoking conversation, so I immediately and thankfully accepted the invitation and duly attended my first meeting. I had some experience of membership of a book group in another state. It had been a very informal group. We frequently discussed anything and everything except the book. We gossiped extensively, we ate cake, drank champagne, and sometimes ended the meeting with a passing reference to the book. Oh yes, I enjoyed the book, good choice. So I was seeking connection and interaction with people and some enjoyable reading when I attended my first book group meeting in Launceston. We gathered at the home of a member, introductions were made and wine was poured. It immediately became apparent that this was a group with structure and rules, in complete contrast to my previous group. The first business of the evening was to vote on admission or not of new members. So feeling a little awkward, I abstained from the vote and expressed my gratitude at being admitted to the group. Now, joining a new group or any group necessarily means becoming vulnerable and perhaps slightly uncomfortable in a group of strangers. There is an element of some fear of the unknown. Will I like the members? Will they like me? What will the selected books be like? Will they think my questions' contribution to be trite or stupid? What was I expected to do and how should I interact? So my first impression was not only of rules and structure, but this group was serious in how they approached the discussion. More often than not, they researched the author, read reviews and developed discussions on plot, character development, writing styles and themes. They read critically and discussed critically. This was a new book group experience for me. Over time, I have settled into the ebb and flow of the group dynamic. I was from the beginning warmly welcomed and made to feel very comfortable. And then here's the rub. Despite our best intentions of appearing to be critical readers, our meetings are essentially more about connection with each other than about the books. I have found new friends that go above and beyond fellow book club member. The laughs, companionship, great Tasmanian wine and cheese, and yes, some gossip, thankfully. And oh yes, more than a few books. It's been a joy. And I think that sums it all up beautifully. So now I'd like to introduce Helen French to describe her book group, and I'm sure that will be very entertaining.
Thank you. I can't promise to be entertaining, but I'll try. I'm a member of a very small book group, and I'm actually the conscripted person here today because I think the first choice didn't want to do it. So if I don't come up to standard, you can blame him. I joined my first book club at the age of 4. I joined when my father decided that the school was taking too long to teach me to read, and they really needed me to read because it meant that they could read without interruption. So I became a member of this very elite group. The membership increased as the family increased. And I spent most of my early years clutching a book for fear I would find myself in a place with nothing to do and the need of a book. Now, this presented some problems. Being a person who grew up on a farm, you had many chores, and sometimes it's really hard to complete those chores while holding a book. I still have memories of the reproachful gaze of a Jersey cow standing in the bales with the little indicator up here not having any milk going through. She'd finished, but I hadn't. I first encountered censorship as a child when I discovered that my mother was absenting herself from the family reading group. She would read in the bedroom. I was determined to find out why she read in the bedroom. So one day when she went away from home, I went in, I looked, I couldn't find a book. I thought, what does she do? Then I thought of the wardrobe. I pulled a suitcase out from the wardrobe. I stood on it, and there was a book, Lady Chatterley's Lover. So forthwith, I sat on the bed and I read. And every time that Mum went away, I sat on the bed and I read. One day I was so engrossed that she returned. And I thought, she's back. So I grabbed the suitcase, I put the book carefully back in the place where it had been, and I turned around and there she was in the doorway. My mother had very vibrant red hair and fierce blue eyes, and you knew when you were in trouble. "What are you doing?" she said. I thought, oh, sorry, Mum. I was going to run away from home, but I've changed my mind. I think I'll stay. My mum was a member of the bookmobile group, and that's when I first encountered the possibility of being able to borrow from a decent library. They turned up every month. I think there were about, in our family, listed about 8 members, including the dog, so that Mum would have, they never questioned why there was a child called Buffer. So Mum would have enough reading material to see her through. I became a member of another book group quite a few years ago. So my current book group is my third, and I'll spend a bit of time talking about all of those. But I thought about, why do people join book clubs? And the first, apart from my family one, the first book club I joined, that was really about a group of friends who had Friday drinks together and talked about books. So they decided that they should formalise that, and we created a book club. We were called the Rampant Readers, and we had much the same experience as Jules with relying on the library, and we did as your group did, Jill. We eventually decided we would buy our books, and the format we used was to a person, the hostess, would choose the book, and they would conduct the meeting. And because we were a diverse group of people, that meant we got diverse books to read. We generally focused on fiction, but every now and then we would decide to read something more of non-fiction. I remember we had a little difference of opinion when I asked, could we read George Megalogenis's book, the Australian Moment, there are two of his. And after the meeting where it was chosen, many messages floated around about, oh, this is not a good thing, we shouldn't be reading books about politics, that's really bad. So we had a separate meeting to discuss whether we would read books that involved politics. And for good measure, we decided we wouldn't read books about religion either, which did not leave a broad scope. Sex was about all that was left, really. So you would not believe the first book we read after George was the biography of Enid Blyton. Not much sex there. This was followed by 50 Shades of Grey. Lots of sex there, but it was introduced as a deep psychological study. And obviously it didn't work because we had to read whatever the next one's called, 50 more shades of grey, 50 shades of darker grey. I'm not sure. One of the things that bothered me about our first book club was that we disintegrated, and I tried to think about why that would happen. Why would a book club that started out so lovingly and full of interest, why it would happen? I think that had something to do with the fact that our simple pizza and rough red at our first meetings rapidly became more challenging. We started to focus more on the food and wine and less on the book. I think that was one reason. Another reason was when we were reading books on the library list, a few of the members had read the book before. And so when you read a good book, you devour it, you live in it, you love it. Second time round, you have to just analyse it. So if you're a member of a group, half of which are wanting to talk about loving the book, and the other half want to talk about such things as genre and author-to-reader contact, you find that some people get alienated by that thread. And I think that's one of the other thing that happened. So that book club, rampant readers we were called, by the way, that book club disintegrated. The book club I'm a member of now is a very small, intimate group. There are only 5 of us. They asked not to have their names revealed. I don't quite know why. It was the sex. Probably no. So we meet once a month. We meet in a private home. We have very standard fare, always something small and savoury, followed by something small and sweet, and very good wine. We discuss a whole range of books. We have read some books that have had great impact on us. We've especially read some Tasmanian books that did that. And we read Tonga Longata, which had a profound impact on people. our members are equally divided between desire to read fiction and desire to read books about aeroplanes and what have you. So that provides a pretty broad scope for us. We have one member who chooses on the basis of setting. So we have read lots of books about Venice and Madrid and Myrtle Bank and Nunamara and Winlia because of where the people have come from. I know of several other book clubs. I know of a book club that's made up entirely of men, and I think they read mainly about aeroplanes. I know another book club that's 30 years old and they are still going strong and they do much the same as your book club does. I read in an article by Philip Adams. He said that when he was talking about why people have book clubs, and he said they were really like Tupperware parties for people who have plenty of Tupperware. So, not wanting to close on that negative note, I just thought I would talk about what I thought book clubs had given to me and the members of the clubs I've been part of. I think they do much the same as being a member of any group, whether it's a sporting club or a book club. They focus people on notions of well-being. They certainly engender tolerance among people. You have to be very tolerant of one another. They, referring back to what Jill said about feelings, that they open up opportunities for people to talk about feelings in a way that may not, at our age, be available to us anywhere else. And they provide a sense of connectedness. So I'm very pleased that I'm able to be a member of a book club still, and I'd be quite happy to join another one if two weren't thought to be too many. Thank you.
So I'm the veteran of some 5 book groups, and I haven't been kicked out of any yet. It happens that I've moved around a lot. So I'm sort of stepping slightly outside the northern Tasmania sphere for one of those. That was a book group in Sydney. And then I'll talk about one of my current ones in Launceston, because one is not enough. The Sydney group was formed under the auspices of a local bookshop, where you put your name on a list, and once 8 names had been collected, the bookshop owner contacted everyone, invited them to the bookshop after hours, selected a book and led the discussion, and then we were encouraged to sail off into the future on our own. Well, so we started to meet at each other's houses, and the process for selecting books was, and this is again under the guidance of the bookshop, where whoever was the host would go to that bookshop, take home a selection of books on invoice, and then we would vote on what book to take. And it was good business for the bookshop because it exposed a lot more books to a lot more people. The only problem was that some hosts who were indecisive might bring home 7, 8, 9 books, so very confusing process. We started with a temporary and supposedly ironic name, The Shrinking Violets, but it stuck. And this book group was based largely on locality, which in a big city like Sydney becomes very important. Because of the random way we were formed, we were total strangers when we met. And so we had very disparate backgrounds in age, nationality, religion and circumstance. And of the original 8, we had members with Australian, English, Scottish and Indian backgrounds. Because it wasn't initially a group of friends, it was easy to invite guests along. We had many interesting guests. apart from one lady who hijacked the entire evening with her anecdotes about her many, many supernatural encounters. The glue that adhered us was a shared love of reading and the company of interesting people, and we did become friends. To keep things interesting, we organised excursions, so that if there was an event or an exhibition that tied in with our chosen book, we took that opportunity. And one of these excursions led to our most unnerving book group. We'd selected a memoir, called Forbidden Love by a young Jordanian author called Norma Khoury. And the local council library had organised an author talk, which we'd paid tickets for. And so we went along and found ourselves crammed into the basement under the library with a very low ceiling, where word quickly spread that there was a security threat, as some young Jordanians who disagreed with the premise of the book had showed up to disrupt the proceedings. Well, we clutched our pearls, I can tell you, particularly when we noticed that the security that the council had organised were their daytime rangers, two of whom were leaning against the wall, still in their khaki shorts and high-vis vests, and more used to dealing with litterbugs and runaway poodles than prospective terrorist threats. But we survived, and it turned out that the young Jordanians had a point, because she was exposed not that long after as being a total scammer who'd left Jordan when she was a toddler and cheated people out of money on 3 continents. This group, over the summer break, when we were talking before about not choosing books, well, we used to read on a theme, and the themes that we selected at different times were the sea, Venice, Desperate Housewives, where Anna Karenina was a big hit, and What's Cooking, books about food, of which there were plenty. And we were asked to also say something about the rules, and I'm just going to talk about some rules that probably should apply to all book groups. And rule 1 is, and if this is the rule that's most often broken, read the book. And rule 2 is attend the meeting. Now, often this goes against rule 1, and you find yourself saying, no, come, just come. I know you haven't read it, but just please attend. But we all know that work, travel, health, family all get in the way, life with a capital L. And rule 3 is see rule 1. And by that I mean spoiler alerts, and you shouldn't have to have them. Because how does a discussion work if just as you're about to raise a particularly thrilling plot twist and someone says, oh, don't tell me, I haven't read the book? At that point, you can banish them to the hallway to put their fingers in their ears and pace until you're finished. And rule 4 is really advice rather than a hard and fast rule. And that is the way you choose books. And that's to choose based on review and personal recommendation and not the blurb. The Violets attended a Sydney Writers' Festival event and rather fell for the rugged good looks of William Dalrymple, the historian, as well as the blurb on his book White Moogles. And that meant we slogged through, I think it was 510 pages of troop movements to get to the 2 pages of the forbidden love story we were all hoping for and the blurb promised. And a really practical rule is to make sure that the book is still in print and available easily. With the Violet, some rules were immediate and some developed over time. An early decision was that the host provided everything. And the glory of this rule was that the host didn't end up with 7 bottles of sparkling, 3 wheels of camembert and a quantity of quince paste at the end of the evening. But you did have to take care with food security, and I think Jill mentioned banishing pets and family. At one meeting, we all trooped off to admire the harbour view and returned to the lounge room only to find that Molly, the golden retriever, had a big smile on her face in front of a totally empty cheese platter, although she did thoughtfully leave the green calyxes on the top of the strawberries for us. My Launceston book group is called Reading Between the Wines, although it seems to have morphed into Reading Between the Vines, and I'm not sure where we're meant to be when we're doing that. And it was my way as a newcomer to attempt to make friends, and that certainly succeeded. And whilst its numbers have shrunk and grown and shrunk again over time, the glue is our friendship, and we're very determined to continue, even though there are only 4 who attend regularly now. Another 3 have moved away but attend whenever they can if they're in the vicinity. And over the years, we've spiced up our book group relationship, keeping it interesting through variation. And our meetings have included the usual post-dinner wine and cheese. We've had morning coffees, lunches and afternoon teas in cafes and in homes. We've had dinner in fine dining restaurants, a Thermomix demo, most expensive book group ever. Takeaway dinners in theme with the book, like a curry to go with a book set in Pakistan. Road trips and Bring a Man. We'd stopped that a few years ago because I think that when we had them all read Annabel Crabb's A Wife Drought, it was a step too far for many of them. Now, for the past year, and you can see on the visual up there, we've combined our discussions with some sort of art project. So we bring along art materials and paint and draw whilst discussing the book, and it's very relaxing in these times. The book choices are probably less cutting edge than they might have been in the past, because we want to enjoy and appreciate the books rather than be depressed or wade through a revolutionary, cutting-edge prize winner which eschews all grammar rules. There is discussion about the chosen books, books in general, art, and also companionable silences. We use a WhatsApp group to communicate as it keeps all our messages together, including links to recommended reading. It's easy to scroll back and double-check the arrangements, particularly for a group like ours, which doesn't have a set meeting format. Before we had the WhatsApp group, the arrangements could be confusing. One evening, the guests turned up to the host's home to find it all in darkness, apart from the flicker of the TV, only to discover that she'd totally forgotten that book group was on. We now refer to that one as surprise book group. And we had enough food between us to discuss the book, and we laugh about it and tease her gently to this day, and she hadn't read the book. There was another instance where we spent the whole evening discussing a book, only to discover that one of the members was discussing a similar but different book. Some of us who have our books on devices download immediately at the meeting, so that's done, the book's ready there on your devices. Margaret and Jill also asked me to talk a bit about the future and younger book groups, and this is again not a Launceston experience, but my daughter and one of her friends in Sydney, and there are two book groups I'd like to just mention briefly. One of them is of women, say 30 to 40 years old, so millennials, set in the Bondi area, all professionals and mainly childless, and the other professional women, all are mothers, all with children, and that's on the North Shore of Sydney. And I was immediately struck by the similarities to our book groups and their organisation. So I think they've been modelling their mothers and grandmothers, and in some cases great-grandmothers, I think. Bondis meet in the evenings for dinner or drinks at a restaurant or quiet hotel, so no home ones. Everyone suggests books, which are then selected by popular vote, and the one whose book is selected brings along 5 discussion points for the next meeting and then leads it to set things going. The Northern group also meet out of the home, and they have no rules, but after talking to me when I was asking about their rules, they've suddenly decided they need rules. I don't know how that's going to go, but managed to encourage more structured discussion, and they collectively select their books. What adheres these two groups is friendship, a shared love of reading, an interesting social experience, and locality, and this is really important in a big city. You have to live close by, otherwise you won't ever do it. So, where are book groups headed? Now, this was of great interest because a generation younger than these millennials, called Gen Z, so teenage to 25-year-olds basically, and they're digital natives and a very, very creative generation. And it's a different landscape. So technology is their driver, and they seek and find each other online with book-related offshoots of popular social media websites. They don't just absorb and react to content as we do in our book groups. They create their own takes on books in short videos, beautifully curated photo montages, and their own writing and performances in reaction to those books. 3 of the most popular platforms for them to meet virtually or gather virtually are, and you can see where they come from, BookTok, Bookstagram and BookTube. And the numbers will boggle your minds. The BookTok website has had 58.5 billion views. There are only 8 billion people in the world, and they're not all looking at BookTok. But the interesting thing too is that printed books abound. They're not reading on devices because they need the physical book there to make their video and dance around it or whatever they do. And so if a book becomes popular on BookTok, it has a massive gain in sales. Now, a lot of book groups have covered Madeline Miller's Song of Achilles, and it's become a BookTok favourite. Hashtag Song of Achilles has received 146 million views. But the content on these sites might also boggle your minds. I looked at one short video and it was titled, and I have to read it to get it correct, and it was grammatically incorrect anyway. This is probably what Achilles' scream sounded like when finding Patroclus dead. And it had a mystifying 657,000 views. I'm wondering if as they age, the Gen Zs won't develop a liking for camembert and quince paste and gathering in small groups in each other's homes, and then find the same friendships and community that we have as book groups. Thank you.
What a wonderful way to round off an amazing journey from the early 60s into contemporary times. I'm conscious of time, but I'm sure that the discussions have raised a lot of interest for you to talk, and please feel free to stay beyond. But to formally end our session, Prue is going to propose a thanks. A wonderful speaker.
My name is Prue McCausland and I'm here today to represent the QV Mag Friends Committee, and on behalf of you all to very much thank the people who've given such an entertaining lot of talks to us today. I'm sure we all agree that gossip, companionship and connection are very much part of the book club world. I have here for the guests some boxes of chocolates, although I'm beginning to feel I should have brought bottles of wine. But I'd ask you all to thank them very much by acclamation.
Don't move just yet.
Sorry, it's probably my fault we went over time. I'm very apologetic. But I do want to take the time to talk about next month, and same time, same place. Look out for more detailed promotion in the next newsletter. And we return to the usual format with a single speaker with many interesting things to say. And I'm delighted that Catherine Walker's in the room. And Catherine is our speaker next month. She's had an absolutely stellar career in the public service, a prominent leader in the work of the Foreign Affairs and Trade departments, now retired but still sought after for her expertise, I think. And her talk is titled Australia's Foreign Aid Program, Successes and Challenges. And that will just be so topical, given the situation in the Pacific, etc. Catherine's work's taken her to many, many countries, continents, and her talk will be fascinating. So please join us. And I'm sorry we've gone a little bit over time. Thank you.